Okay, next news story. We're going to be sticking with the Switch 2 here. So, Oliver, something that you noticed this week is that there has been a slight change to wording about the VRR support for the Switch 2 when docked. And this is on official Nintendo sites. It's all a bit of a puzzle. We don't know why it was changed, but why don't you take up the story here? What do you think? Is VRR support for docked play, connected to a TV, that is, going to support VRR or not? It's not clear, is it?
That's the question on everyone's minds. That's the $6 million question. And hopefully, maybe we can come a little bit closer to an answer here today. So this is a very weird situation because when the Switch 2 was revealed 2 weeks ago, they were very clear about the screen spec and portable play. It had a VRR screen, HDR, 7.9 inches, 120 hertz and 1080p, a pretty nice list of specs there, but they were more evasive about the spec for docked play. In particular, like the display out, they later clarified it was up to 1440p 120, 4K 60. That made a lot of sense there. And it supported HDR as well. They were quite clear about that. But they did not specify VRR support. They didn't list it on their website specs. It wasn't in the direct. So what was going on, right? That was the question. But shortly after the direct was published, on their website advertising Switch 2 features across multiple regions and multiple languages, this is what they said. They said, the system also supports HDR, VRR, and frame rates up to 120 FPS on compatible TVs. And then beneath it, there was a subscript saying 4K resolution VRR and HDR are available in supported games and require a compatible display. So that's like really unequivocal language, I would say. And so I even cut segments from the DF Direct, the first Direct we produced, where Rich was questioning, we were questioning, is there VRR in docked play or not? Because it seemed so unequivocal to me that was the case, right? But on Wednesday, a very curious thing happened, which is that on the Canadian and US websites, VRR was removed from that description. They only mentioned HDR and 120 FPS support. That was on the Canadian and US websites, but then actually later, the following day, it was removed from the European websites as well. So it's gone from the Great British website, gone from the Dutch website, gone from all these European websites for the Switch 2. So I posted about this on social media after it was brought to my attention by Fiddler2K and the DF supporter program, and I obviously validated the information. And it was a very curious change. Now, given that it's permeated through all their websites, I think it has to have been for a reason here. It's probably not just some mistake. Obviously, Nintendo has not commented on it as of this recording, but it's a very weird omission, and it's a very material omission because VRR can be a very important feature. So I think one element, what could be going on here, is that the Switch 2, like the Switch 1, it's using a DisplayPort to HDMI converter. And historically speaking, I believe on other Intel Arc cards and on Steam Deck, DisplayPort to HDMI conversion has had issues with VRR support there. People have had issues with DisplayPort to HDMI conversion. With VRR, in a lot of cases, it seems to flat out not work. In some cases, maybe you can get it running with a bit of tinkering there. But my own personal expectation here is that maybe Nintendo intended to ship VRR as a feature on Switch 2 in docked play, and then subsequently they've come to realize maybe this isn't going to make launch, or maybe it's not going to make the console at all. But something clearly has to have changed either in their PR or in their understanding of the device between 2 weeks ago and 2 days ago, right? Something shifted and something has to have changed, I presume.
Right. Mm-hmm. Do you think it could be simply that they found some compatibility issues? I mean, this is entirely speculation, but there is obviously something has changed that's necessitated a change to PR messaging globally. But it could well be the case that maybe they found some compatibility issues and they're not comfortable rolling out the feature for day one. Therefore, things had to be adjusted there. Just don't really know, do you? It's kind of,
No.
a bit weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I mean, yeah. I mean, the whole sort of output of the Switch 2 in terms of its docked capabilities, it's always seemed a bit strange because, actually we got this question here from supporter Julian Schnitter. Morning, lads. Do you think that Nintendo is making a mistake by not running the system docked at 4K 120? Obviously, games won't run that high, but they are missing out on fully utilizing docked low frame rate compensation. Well, that's an interesting point, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think potentially they are, But in this scenario where they're not automatically kicking you into that 1440p 120 mode when you need to have it for your game, like the PS5 does, right? Where you might have a 4K 60 mode and then it kicks you to 4K 120 or even 1440p 120, depending on your display settings, depending on the cable you have connected, depending on your television support, it will kick you around to different display configurations as needed. If they're doing that on Switch 2, I don't think it's a big deal to go from 4K 60 to 1440p 120, because realistically, you know, do you really need that 4K pixel grid in a title that's kicking
not
you
really.
to 120 especially? I think in most cases that's not going to be necessary. The VRR support to me is more material, just because even though VRR is like not a huge deal to me on PlayStation and Xbox here, because with Switch games, you're dealing with a much more compromised performance level in some titles, and there may just be no room to give. Indeed, where we might be seeing that with an upcoming title potentially we'll talk about later in the show. So I think that when you're dealing with that situation, sometimes you have no room left to give except go on frame rate. And if you have to let go on frame rate, then the only thing that's going to save you is VRR potentially. And that's not an ideal situation to be in. And I generally wish that developers would target high locked frame rates there. In this case, I can see a pretty compelling use case for it. And weirdly, they're going to have that use case in handheld. They're not going to have it docked. So that's a bit of a discontinuity. That's a bit of a break in feature set. That's probably not great if you're a game developer trying to make your game to work well across both modes.
Absolutely interesting. I mean, one thing that I was hoping to see at the hands-on event last week was being able to access the system settings screen and to take a look at the display output options. But alas, development hardware just kind of locks you out of that. And all we've got is like one screen from, I think it was the Nintendo Direct, and it only shows like the very, very top of the display settings there. But there's kind of like a bar on the right that hints that the display options are actually quite extensive. You just don't get to see them. So we'll have to wait to actually wait to see what's going on there, because we don't know at the moment. Interesting stuff. I mean, you know, what could I say? Surely they'll sort it out at some point. The concept of having VRR support for the handheld display and not for the docked experience doesn't quite make sense. If you were Mr. Nintendo sitting down to design a console, you wouldn't factor that in as a design point, would you? It just doesn't really make sense. So I'm hopeful that they will figure it out at some point.